Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Go.
Hello, and welcome to the New Commons. I'm Johanna Laurie.
And I'm Harry Bubb.
And that's right. My guest today is Harry Bubb, who I interviewed last time. Harry is retired as a professional graphic artist, but is never retired as a truth seeker. So we're going to be discovering, and we're going to actually be continuing our discussion of last time about the origins and the current conflict going on in Gaza. So Harry, take it away.
Okay. Last program we discussed the history of the Arab-Israeli wars, and today we're going to show some pictures and discuss the Hamas attacks on October 7th, 2023, and also the consequences of those attacks. We must first remind the audience that there have been 15 Arab-Israeli wars since 1948, and they all are relate back to the initial cause, and the cause being that the Zionists stole the land from the Palestinians and made their homeland out of it. And this is something that's not all that well advertised, as you might expect. Nobody wants to tell. Just like we stole our land from the Native Americans, the Israelis don't want to admit that they had stole their land from the Palestinians. So the Israeli forces not only military defeated the Palestinians and stole their land, but they expelled 750,000 of them out of the country and made them destitute refugees, and right now they're being supported by the United Nations Relief Fund, and they have been supported for the last 75 years. They have 68 UNRWA bases. They're not bases. They're
camps.
Camps, yes,
camps, yeah.
Camps spread around 4 countries. And there's 5 million Palestinian inhabitants who depend upon the UN for their livelihood. So that's kind of an interesting thing that an average person doesn't know. I'll take a second and I'll mention a few books that I have read and used for the background information. One of them is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ian Pape.
If you hold it up so they can really see it.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to be able to see the titles and things like that. But anyhow, there's another one by Ian Pape, which is titled The Biggest Prison on Earth, which is talking about the occupied territories. And I'll mention the occupied.
He is an Israeli historian, isn't he?
Yeah, these 2 books were by Ian Pape. He's a Israeli historian. Have some note. This other one is The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalideh, and he's a Palestinian historian. Mm-hmm. So these are good books, and we also have another one over.
Yes, I wanted to show, against our better judgment, the hidden history of how the U.S. was used to create Israel. This book was written by Allison Weir, an American from California, who went in 2000 to Gaza during the Second Intifada. She was somebody who, like most of us, had not really been that interested or knowledgeable about what was going on in that part of the world. but she was a journalist and she wanted to see for herself. So she went, and what she saw was amazing to her because none of it was being reported in the major media. And she decided on the basis of that trip that she wanted to get involved and learn more about it. And the result was that in 2014, she wrote this book, and actually she came in 2017, and I met her at the Toadstool. She came with this book and some other materials and gave a really interesting talk about her travels and how she got involved in them. The thing about this book is that it's an easy read, unlike some of the histories which are long and you have to take quite a bit of time to study them. She has a very concise description of the history, and then most of the book is full of notes, so that she's backed up everything that she knows. So you can just read the beginning, which is the overview, or you can read the notes if you want to know more about it. So this is a handy one to get started with. She also has an organization that's called, let's see, I got to get this right. IfAmericansKnew.org. If you look them up online, you can get teaching materials, little pamphlets like this on various subjects. You know, they've divided it up into easy ways for people to learn more about the situation. So she's a very good person to get started with. She's very honest, and she works with people from various universities, and she's done a really good job of getting to the heart of some of these issues. So.
Yeah, I saw her as well. That's where I got her copy of the book too, a copy of her book. So, yeah, we both went to the Toadstool for that. The Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, were a very dramatic event, not only for Israel but also for the rest of the world. And but it was just one of the latest attempts by the Palestinians to get the attention of Israel and the world to the injustices that have been heaped upon them since 1948.
That is what I was going to ask you, actually, Harry. In what ways is that attack different from previous ones? What would you say?
Yeah, the biggest problem, the biggest thing was it was very successful. The Israelis had prided themselves in their military and their prowess as a military power, and how that nobody could harm them. And they actually were looked down upon the Palestinians as fighters, and never thought that they would ever be able to perpetrate such an attack.
But they must have been hearing all kinds of chatter online, because they being the most surveilled country in the world, just about.
But they ignored it. They ignored it, and part of that was the arrogance of power. They knew they were more powerful, and they simply didn't think these little people, could ever do that.
Huh, yeah.
And quite frankly, Hamas themselves did not expect to be so successful.
So you really do feel that they were surprised. They didn't have any idea that this was going to happen on this day and was going to happen quite the way it did.
No, I don't think so.
Huh.
No.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we're going to what we're going to do mostly today is show pictures. This will be a photo essay of the Hamas attack and also the consequences. And we can begin with showing the first slide, or the first photo of the map of Gaza. Okay, this gives you a little idea that Gaza is a very small strip of land, and it's about the size of Washington, D.C. It's the home for 2 million Palestinians. Gaza is reportedly the most densely populated place on the earth. It's been under Israeli rule since 1967, and it is essentially an open-air prison. The Palestinians cannot get in or out without going through checkpoints or entrances that the Israelis control. And they have 7 entrances and exits to the Gaza Strip. And quite frankly, very seldom was more than 2 or 3 open to anybody. And of course, now they're totally closed off. Now, the important thing to understand is that Gaza cannot grow their own food. They're totally dependent on the outside world. So they have been receiving anywhere between 150 and 200 trucks a day of food and medical equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And when October 7th happened, the Israelis locked up those entrances so that there was no food coming in. So basically, very little food has come in since October 7th of 2023. The fuel ran out very shortly. So they had to cut down their power plant. Now, their power plant, to begin with, was only putting out 2 to 4 hours of electricity to the people every day. So you can imagine living in a hot climate with undependable electricity, only getting 2 or 4 hours a day. For the last 57 years, they've been living this intolerable existence within Gaza, and every once in a while they strike back by shooting some missiles over at Israel and some sort of protest. But when they went on October 7th, they were very successful, and the result was the Israelis struck back really hard on them. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, this is the breaking through the entrance of the border wall between Gaza and Israel. And now, in order to begin to even do this, they had to cancel out the detectors, various detectors that they had, and the alarms that they had on the fences and under the ground in the fences.
So this was this is a picture from October 7th?
That's the October 7th. Those are the Hamas breaking through this one entrance. And they had a very, very good plan, and they knew where all the problem was the Israelis had started to become too dependent on electronic devices along the perimeter. They had an electronic fence, so to speak, of detectors, and they thought that was impregnable, and they didn't have a lot of troops there. And that's once they canceled out the detectors, they were able to get in without the Israelis knowing that they got in and where they got in. Go ahead on to the next slide, please. This is a kind of a hard slide to see, but it's important to know that the Hamas had sent a number of troops in with motorized paragliders. And they actually flew over the border wall, and they actually had motorcycles. They had troops with motorcycles on these gliders. And this is a photo from there's a music festival, Supernova Music Festival going on, where they had something like 3,000 attendees, and this photo was taken from the music festival. Go ahead on to the next slide, please. This is what happened after they landed. The music festival people were panicked and ran and tried to get back to their cars and get the hell out of there, because the Hamas was there with troops, and they were killing people and capturing hostages. Go ahead on to the next. This is one of the Hamas fighters, and he was captured on a dash camera on one of the cars that was in the parking lot. Go ahead on to the next. There's another one, another Hamas fighter who was caught on the camera. Go ahead on the next. And here's a Hamas who has captured an Israeli and started to take him back, probably to a car or a truck. The Hamas was tried to steal cars, and they did to some degree, because they didn't have enough vehicles to get all these people back. They really didn't expect to have so many hostages.
What do you know anything? Does anybody know anything about their game plan? How many hostages they were trying to?
Well, they weren't trying. They didn't have any number. The reason for the attack, it was very important to know, is that they had a lot of Palestinians in the Israeli jails that they wanted to get out, especially, important Hamas people who were in jail. And they also wanted to keep the Israelis from desecrating their mosques. The Israelis, Ariel Sharon, went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and he said, "Hey, this belongs to Israel, and we can come here anytime we want to." Well, you just don't go to somebody else's church and without their permission, and especially when you're another religion. And so, and part of it was that they wanted to try to somehow loosen the siege on Gaza, because they've been there for 57 years in this open-air prison, and it wasn't a very happy experience.
So actually, it would seem that this was a new bargaining point.
Right.
That if they had hostages, if they had something they could bargain with.
Right.
Because there's been really no bargaining up until
they had experiences previously where they were able to, with maybe 3 or 4 hostages, were able to get out, maybe 50 or 100 of their people out of jail. Mm-hmm. So they thought, well, we'll do the same thing. The problem was that they were just too successful. And for a number of reasons, the Israelis...
So that's part of why escaping with the hostages was hard too, and why the hostages got fired on by Israelis, because by the time Israelis figured out what was happening, it was hard to know who was a hostage.
Yeah,
and who
there were a lot of friendly fire accidents. In other words, there were a lot of Israelis killed just because the Israeli troops didn't know who was who.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead on to the next. This is a photo of the parking lot area. It's a lot of the people from the festival ran back to their cars and thought they were going to drive away. Well, they started to, but the Hamas caught up with them and shot up a number of the cars, and so all these people. You can see the car doors are all open. These people are just jumping out of the cars and running for cover. And there are 4 or 5, 6 burned cars there, and so it was a real...
what burned the cars at that point? Was it the Hamas who burned the cars?
Oh, yeah, the Hamas was just shooting them up, and they hit a gas tank, and they
blew up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was just a
kind of a free-for-all at that point, yeah.
Well, go ahead on to the next.
Yeah.
All right, this shows, it's kind of hard to see this, but this shows 2 hostages and 3 Hamas people. And this is a BBC News photo, and it's very, obviously taken with a phone, and so the quality is not too good. But it just gives you an idea of they were walking these people along the road, and then they had to get some sort of transportation back to Gaza. And when they got them back to Gaza, they had tunnels underneath Gaza, which were utility tunnels by and large, but over the years, Hamas had built their own tunnels as well. So that's where they hid the hostages, part of the places that they hid the hostages. In the end run, they got back about 200 hostages. They early on they had a prisoner exchange where I think close to 100 were returned to Israel, and but there's still over 100 that are that are still in Gaza, captured by the Hamas.
Who are still alive? Or?
And still alive. Some of 30 or 40 of them are dead. Some have been killed by Israeli fire, and some of them died for various other reasons. But anyhow, go ahead on to the next. This gives you a little idea of the consequences of the Israeli bombing attacks on Gaza. Go ahead on to the next. Okay. This is a picture of a rescue worker with a dead child that was extracted from a collapsed building. Well, obviously, one of the problems they had, they were striking the buildings with bombs and missiles, and the buildings were collapsing, and people were, there's probably 8,000 to 10,000 people who are under the rubble right now that may or may not be extracted. Go ahead on to the next. This is one of the parents is just given his the remains of his child. Go ahead to the next. This one is is also a child that's been extracted from a bombed out building. This one is alive, and the rescue worker, the ambulance worker, is taking him back to the ambulance. Go ahead on to the next. All right, this is okay. This is the Yasser Arafat airport. Now, the Israelis allowed them to have it during. They had good times and bad times as far as relationships with the people in Gaza. And during the good times, they allowed the Gazans to have an airport, and they called it the Yasser Arafat Airport. And the problem with that, it opened in 1998. It was built with foreign funds, German, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all those kinds of places. It was never paid for by the Israelis. The Palestinians couldn't afford to pay for it. Anyhow, it was open for 2 years, and then there was a little bit of a conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and it was closed, and eventually it was demolished. Go ahead on to the next. This is the airport before the bombings. Okay, so you get an idea. It was a pretty decent-looking airport. Go to the next, please. Now, Gaza had their own power plant. Of course, any city needs to have their power plant. And in 2014, the Israelis bombed the power plant and put it totally out of business. And after that, that's when they had maybe 2 to 4 hours of electricity. Was all they could generate for the whole city. And you can imagine what from 2014 to 2024, we're talking 10 years of having minimal electricity within Gaza. Go ahead to the next. This is a picture of this fellow died on the street, probably of a heart attack after one of the bombings. And this is almost a pieta with, there are 3 people who were kind of witnessing this scene, and it's very moving. Go ahead on to the next. This is the Palestinian child on the floor of a hospital waiting to get treatment. He's just been brought in on that little pallet. And go ahead on to the next. This is obviously this is a mass burial trench they're just about ready to bury these bodies. And over on the right are a group of family and also the people who are doing the excavation and everything. And they're giving a couple of minutes of last prayers before they before they bury these.
They probably had cemeteries before, maybe do this.
Yeah.
But people are dying so.
Oh no, they buried. Yeah. They have mass burial. I mean, you have almost 40,000 people killed. So we have mass burial sites all over Gaza. Mm-hmm. Some of them, recent ones, have been right outside the hospitals because so many people died in that particular area. So they had to. It's in a hot climate.
Right, bury them before they're healthy.
You can't keep bodies around very long in that kind of climate. So that's where these little bags are. These little plastic bags. Mm-hmm. Go ahead on to the next, please. This is one of the reporters that was shot. 175 was the last count that I got. 175 journalists have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. And this particular woman was shot in the head. Here she is wearing her press thing, and this is how she was when she was shot. And anytime you get someone who's shot in the head, it's almost always on purpose. You don't accidentally shoot somebody in the head. Even in combat, you very seldom hit the head. So, and now go ahead to the next. This is inside of a ambulance, and this guy is kissing the foot of his dead child. Go ahead. Yasser Arafat was a Palestinian leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and eventually he was brought back to Gaza and allowed to be the leader of the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority was basically a way of outsourcing the control of Gaza to the Palestinians. And it was a cynical way of they were saying, well, if you take care of these of Gaza and you run Gaza, and in 5 years we will consider making it a state. Well, the Israelis never had any intention of doing that, but within 5 years, the population was absolutely sick of PLO or Yasser Arafat's rule, and they elected Hamas.
Shouldn't we speak about the Oslo Accords, though? Because everybody goes back to that there was this time when they were negotiating, and Arafat was the negotiator for the Palestinian side, right. And there was this great hope all over the world that actually there might be some kind of a breakthrough and some kind of an agreement between the two sides, and that did not come to fruition. And then, do you remember why? I mean, we blamed Arafat. We said
everybody
Arafat
blamed.
was not willing to negotiate.
The West blamed Arafat, but it was absolutely not true. Yeah. They were just trying to sucker him into a bad deal. The Israelis themselves have absolutely no intentions of ever giving up Gaza or the West Bank. They might, in a real stretch, they might give up Gaza, but they'll never give up West Bank. But they have always been disingenuous about all these peace things. They're not going to give the Palestinians a homeland. I
think the basic sticking point there, wasn't it, that they would still have control. Theoretically, Palestine was going to be a separate state, and Arafat was going to be, for that time, in charge, the leader in charge. But he didn't really have any power, and that's what. And I mean,
they were never going to allow
everything was going to be controlled by them anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just, and everything was. They said one thing to the world, and then they said another thing to themselves and within themselves. And one of the good things about the books that I have read is they go in, especially this one here, is going into the minutes of the meetings of all the ministers and finding out what the minister is actually saying. So the true story comes out in this particular book because he got all the information from the minutes of the meetings that they had.
And this is an Israeli historian, you know. So I mean, it's known to people in Israel who want to find it. This information.
Oh yeah,
it's known. Yeah.
There are a number of really fine Israeli historians, and who will admit the fact that Israel did this and Israel massacred that, and they purposely did the 1967 war. There are a number of historical books that tell the story. The problem is that the average person doesn't read and doesn't read this kind of stuff. And
well, the other thing is that the media has projected a totally different. It's like we have two different scenarios.
Right.
The one scenario is the official scenario, and that's what we all hear. And then there's this other scenario, which is hard to believe because the media never supports the other scenario. Right. I mean, Eli, what happened recently? I think Papa came here, and he had a hard time even being. Did the media report that?
Yeah,
that he was here?
Yeah. The interesting story about story about Pape, who is the author of these two books that I have right here. He went to Detroit. He flew in and out of the country. Flew into Detroit, and the U.S. government took him back into a back room and questioned him for 3 or 4 hours, and they made him give up his cell phone and took everything off his cell phone and questioned him, and as if he was a criminal or something. And here's a world famous historian who just happened to be telling the story that they didn't want to hear, and. But anyhow, that's our government does a lot of things that are. We should by now understand that our government does things that are wrong, and they have done.
Well, and that actually, as Alison Weir points out, we have been instrumental in setting up Israel and supporting it ever since. So that's really very important that people in this country realize the extent to which we are behind everything they do, including what they're doing right now.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and the amount of aid that we give Israel is usually 3 to 5 million a year.
If we could switch to this a minute, we can show this. This is a graph of U.S. foreign aid to Israel. The dark, the reddish part is military aid, and the lighter part is economic aid. So, and this is to several countries, Turkey being down the bottom, India, UK, Iraq, Ukraine, South Vietnam. The aid gets bigger and bigger as we go up. Afghanistan, Egypt, and then here's Israel. So compare all those other countries,
tiniest country,
and that's the kind of aid that we get, that they get from us. This is the military, and this is the economic. So I think people should see. You can't see the fine print, but you can see the comparison.
Rest assured that there's a skewed amount of
and we're talking
aid.
Billions, billions of dollars.
And that's not counting the aid that they get from Jews around the world. The synagogues all give money, and there's a number of groups besides AIPAC which donate a number. So the Israelis get 2 to 5 million from outside donations, and then they get anywhere from 1.5 to 3 from the U.S. And a lot of this is impossible to trace down because they don't want you to know. Very simple. Go ahead on to the next slide, please. Okay, we had Yasser Arafat. Okay, here we have the the families of the hostages are protesting against the Israeli government, trying to get them to accept a peace deal so they can get their hostages back. Now, they've been protesting since the day of October 7th to get their hostages back, for the Israeli government to have a ceasefire and get their hostages back. And the Israeli government has been ignoring these people, and they have had some terribly violent demonstrations in Israel over the getting the hostages back. So we don't see a lot of this in our mainstream media, but
because what they're saying to us, what the Israeli government is saying to us, is that this is the purpose. We have two purposes in being here. One is to get the hostages back, and the other is to destroy Hamas.
Right.
So that's what they say to us all the time. So.
Yeah, and just recently I noticed today, I think one of the newses pointed out that one of the leading generals over in Israel says, "Hey, we're never going to destroy Hamas. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a group of ideas, and it's not. You don't kill ideas. You can kill people, but you don't kill ideas." Go ahead on to the next, please. Okay, this is a picture of they have a building that's been hit by bombs or missiles, and now the Palestinians are trying to get people out, and this is the frantic, the frantic effort of people to get in and try to extract people out from under the rubble. Go ahead on to the next. And this one is the same thing. It's in just another location. They're getting underneath the slabs of concrete and I think right in the middle, it's hard to see from here, but right in the middle they have a boy. They have extracted this boy and they've gotten him out. But as I said, there's probably at least 10,000 people who are buried under the rubble that they haven't been able to get out. But certainly they did get a number out. One of the important things to point out too is because of the medical system in Palestine is not able to handle a lot of things because they don't have supplies. There have been a number of amputations that would never have happened, and these amputations quite often happen, and with children as well, without anesthetic. And go ahead. On to the next, please. Okay, this is Ariel Sharon in the middle, the white-haired man, who is going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque with a bunch of bodyguards. He sure as hell needs a lot of bodyguards. He's going to a Palestinian mosque.
Well, the thing we need to say about Al-Aqsa is the second holiest site in Islam,
right?
As far as I know.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's in Jerusalem, downtown Jerusalem, and the Israelis are constantly battling to take it over and perhaps even destroy it.
They want to destroy it.
Basically,
they've been talking about destroying it, building a temple over it.
Yeah. So.
But anyhow, this move by Sharon going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque started the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada was there's two intifadas. The first Intifada was relatively benign, a lot of stone throwing, Molotov cocktails, all these. The Palestinians were throwing stones at the military vehicles of Israeli military vehicles.
Was that during the time when when Palestinians were the suicide bombers? There was that period,
No, the suicide bombers is in the Second Intifada.
Oh, that was the second one.
Second Intifada.
Yeah.
The Second Intifada, the first Intifada, I think, was in 1983, and the second one is or closer to 2,000.
2,000, yeah.
Yeah. The Second Intifada was much, much more violent. They killed thousands of Palestinians. And the Israelis, the difference was that the Israelis treated the Gaza as if it were an enemy city. And they went in with airplanes, and they went in with helicopters, and they shot people from helicopters, and they shot people from, and they bombed. Obviously, they bombed, and they sent troops in with tanks, and so it was a much, much more violent conflict. And no sooner had that ended than we had a little period of peace, and then we get to Hamas attack. Go ahead to the next, please. This is a young boy who is showing signs of starvation, and
that's happening to
it's
large numbers of children.
Yeah, the Israelis are actually using starvation as a weapon. The UN and a number of agencies have admitted this and had tried to somehow mitigate it and try to shame Israel into stopping this, because they are not allowing enough food in for these people to
feed
live.
Them, yeah.
And the interesting thing was, the diabolical thing is that you don't have to kill somebody with starvation to ruin their lives. They will be stunted for life, either mentally or physically, if they don't get enough food at the right time. And so, you go ahead on to the next, please. This is a morgue, and we have two women who are holding their babies, and for the last time. And it's kind of tough. Go ahead on to the next. Excuse me. This is the World Kitchen. There was an aid group, small aid group called World Central Kitchens, I believe, and they had three of their vehicles in a convoy, and they were approved by the Israelis to have this convoy, and the Israelis attacked these convoys and shot up all three of the vehicles, killed 7 people, six of the aid workers and 1 driver.
And I think as a result, the World Kitchen is now not sending.
All of the aid groups, a lot of the aid groups had to stop when that happened, because they didn't feel that they were safe to have their people there, and that was part of the that was the idea of the attack, is to scare the aid workers into not delivering aid. And Israel has purposely stopped aid from going into Gaza by various means.
Well, another is recently that we were funding, and as were a number of countries, the UNRWA, the UN agency that distributes food, and Israel has said that what was it, 13 of those people,
13 of 30,000
had some kind of connection with Hamas.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we slashed our funding for UNRWA. So, I mean, that's another way to not get any food in.
Number one, Biden cut it off.
Yeah.
And then the Congress cut off funding for it. So right now, as it is, and a number of other countries as well, cut off funding to UNRWA, which was the UN relief fund. And so this was the only thing keeping these people alive, and also they were holding the people, they were holding the trucks back in other ways, and they were even attacking some of the Israelis were attacking the trucks so that they wouldn't get in.
You know, I think one thing too we might mention just briefly is that pictures of the hostages who have been released, and there have been some, they all look pretty healthy, which indicates to me, at least, that the Palestinians are treating them as well as they can, given their situation, how little they have to share with anybody. You know, the hostages are not coming out all emaciated, and
right.
You know, we never did eat. Some of them are saying, well, you know, there's some days we didn't eat, but my gosh, there's weeks, there's you know, months, there's years now the Palestinians haven't eaten. So I mean, yeah,
there's a dirty little secret too, that the Israelis never wanted to get out, was that during the 1948-49 war, the Palestinians were taking care of the Israeli prisoners much better than the Israelis were taking the Palestinian prisoners. So that's just the way it is. Let's see. Let's finish up with the photos. Okay, we have that. Or we have this young boy who's dragging one of his siblings is laying in back of the cart, and he's dragging this little cart. But from this picture, you can see the destruction, the amount of destruction that exists in the.
Interesting to me that I just read this morning that Netanyahu has compared this current war that they're doing in Gaza to World War II. And if you look at these pictures, you do in fact, it reminds you of the bombed out cities in World War II. But of course then it was the Germans doing it.
Yeah,
and
the
here
bad
it is,
guys.
Here it is, the Israelis. It's like a repeat of, you know, history repeats.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Well, it's something that you could easily compare.
Yeah.
To see that the Israelis have become the Nazis.
Well, that's
and
it.
And the Palestinians have become the Jews.
Become the Jews. I mean, yes.
And it's clear.
Yeah.
And even Ilan Pape mentions that in one of his books, but he mentions it very, very carefully because he's an Israeli. He doesn't want to.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to get hung. Yeah. But go ahead on to the next, please. This is another picture of the devastation in Gaza, and you can see the scale of it. Go ahead on to the next, please. This is the last slide, and the reason why I put this one here is, to me, it looked very medieval. It looked as if that someone has driven these people back into the Stone Age. We have modern buildings destroyed, and these poor people are moving around in donkey carts. And this is the essence of what's happening. They're totally. This is what a genocide is. You destroy the people, and you destroy the infrastructure, and the Israelis have always wanted to get rid of the Palestinians, and they were able to get rid of during their War of Independence, which was 1948-49. They were able to get rid of 750,000, which was 3/4 of the population, and now they're trying to do the same thing. They tried to do the same thing on the West Bank, and they expelled something like 75,000 people from the West Bank when they got control of that. So it's been an insidious war. We have to try to see both sides of it, but we have to be aware of the initial thing was that this land was stolen from the Palestinians in 1948 and 49. and the Palestinians have been trying to get it back or to get some sort of justice.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have to mention is in 1948 or 49, the world, the U.S. and the Europeans and all the other countries who were in the UN knew that this was happening. This was obvious. This was an obvious thing that the Israeli had stole this land, and they ignored it, and it was ignored in the press, and consequently, it took a lot of years before people realized that, oh my God, they stole this land, and so the Palestinians are the victims, and
yeah, I'd like to say, yeah, that really because it's been so skewed in the sense of the support that Israel has gotten over all these years from us and other countries for its right to exist as a country, as a place where Jews can call a homeland. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that idea, but just the fact of the way it came into being and how they have pursued it ever since and how they are pursuing it now brings us to a point where really you have to say how, what sort of future is going to be here, and this is where things, I have the feeling that pushing it as hard as they have up to this point and what they're doing in Gaza now, which makes it clear that that there is no, there's no going back from expelling all these Palestinians, because I'll just read you something that somebody who's thought about this a whole lot longer than I have. He says that they're positioned. Wait a second here. Make no mistake, there is no meaningful room for compromise between these two sides. As suggested above, there's something dreadfully predictable about the direction that things are going in Gaza. And if given these impulses, the real work is to get people to come to a new understanding and completely something that is quite different from what they've had before. This article had talked about the fact that what we're doing now, what's happening now, what the Israelis are doing now, creates a situation that nobody can go back from. They have to go forward with something, even if they kill all the Palestinians in Gaza, which God knows we hope they won't. There's still that many Gazans in other countries. There's still, as you say, the idea of Palestine, which will never die. They cannot kill the fact that people called Palestinians have lived here for all that long time and deserve to have a homeland too. So what do you actually do about that? And I kind of think we get down to what do we do? As somebody living at a distance from this and seeing all this suffering and finding it really, really hard to even look at it, I have to say to myself, so yes, I don't want to feel hopeless. I want to feel like there's something I can do. And in this, I'm bolstered by what Alison Weir says, because the work that she's done, when she went and actually saw it, and she decided she had to make a difference. And I think that the way, we're not going to all be Alison Weirs, but we can make a difference by speaking out, by seeing what we feel to be true and not true, and staying in communication with people who may feel differently, so that we can actually arrive at some new point. She says, Alison Weir says, it's time for all of us to stop our self-censorship. Every generation has a chance to act courageously, to impose the kind of injustice and unthinkable brutality that's going on in the Middle East right now. Or we might avert our eyes and remain silent, but it's time to stop saying they came for the Palestinians and I did nothing. And there she's quoting, is it Niebuhr from the Second World War, one of the German resistors said,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
they came for the working class. What was
Yeah.
it? What do you remember the quote?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
They came for different groups, and I did nothing, and then they came
then
for
they
me.
came for me,
And then
yeah.
they came for me.
Yeah.
You know, and you realize that in the case of this kind of brutality going on, we all lose our basic humanity if we don't stand up and say what we really feel in our hearts about what's going on. And
This is what the college students have been trying to do.
yeah.
And this has been a marvelous time, actually, for students to realize, and they've educated themselves. And of course, they've been kind of censored out of the news, and then also the administrations have been very quick to shut them down. But college students today have really know what's going on, and they have been
You're right.
on the forefront of this.
That's very heartening.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think back to our youth, Harry and I grew up at the time of the Vietnam War, and that's college students were, and I remember back, you know, the back to the piece,
We did our marches.
We did our marches. We did our
tried
marches, and we began to, you know, at this age, we're both in our 80s, and we look at college students and we think, well, what have they got? But they've got this now. They have an issue now, and it's all related to our humanity, basically. That we need to assert our humanity at times when it's important to do so. So, yeah.
There's a bell that's rung. When the old saying about a bell, once it's rung, it can't be unrung. And so, people have graduated to an understanding that they didn't have before this.
And I think, you know, it's important. I was happy to hear Bernie Sanders standing up in Congress and saying it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. You know, it's not anti-Semitic to have these feelings that are pro-Palestinian because you see people suffering. And I think that's really, really important that everybody realize that whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish, you all have basic feelings about what's human and what's inhuman.
And what's right and wrong.
What's wrong.
Right and wrong is something that we all live with and know and understand instinctively.
And, you know, in our local community here, we've had discussion already, and that's good, and maybe it will lead to something. I mean, Rabbi Aronson had a long talk with the two women who led the peace protest on the square a few weeks ago, and I think that as long as people keep talking to each other, as long as people and say what's in their hearts, and try not to just take sides because for whatever reason, things can maybe change. I mean, that's my hope anyway. I think that to assert our humanity is never the wrong thing to do. So
that's a good way to end the show.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being with us, and thank you, Harry.
It was quite all right.
I'm
glad to do it.
Helping with this presentation.